Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video. With Donald Trump's official nomination for president by the Republican Party occurring earlier this week, we figured now would be a good time to discuss exactly what his re-election platform is. It's easier for a challenger to come up with a platform, they just need to differentiate themselves from the current administration, but an incumbent's goals are always going to be more politically interesting, since they're now in the position of having to defend and build on their own record. And Trump, in classic Trump fashion, has further spiced up that process this year. So let's take a look at what exactly Donald Trump is planning to do if re-elected this year. Before we get into it though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel. TLDR US is currently racing TLDR EU to 100,000 subscribers, and while the US is closer, the EU is growing faster. However, we know a bunch of you aren't subscribed yet, so if that's you, tap subscribe and hit the bell icon to help the channel out and be notified when we post videos in the future. Normally, a political party will convene at, well, the convention, to finalise the official party platform. If you're more familiar with British politics, you can think of this as the party's manifesto. The Democratic Party's platform was officially adopted at their convention last week. And it's an absolute chunk of a document, coming in at 92 very long, very dull pages. Which, to be fair, is pretty standard. Party platforms are not built to be light reading material. They're more a way of showing the party actually has a plan and knows what it's doing, as well as giving the media an idea of where the party is looking to focus and what to pay attention to. But here's where things get interesting. Because while the Democrats released a pretty standard platform, the Republicans didn't. In fact, they didn't release a new platform at all. Well, sort of. It's complicated. Back in June, the Republican National Committee, or RNC, voted to forego the process of crafting a new platform, and instead simply recycling 2016's. The reason given for this was that safe social distancing made getting together to write a platform too difficult and unrealistic. Some, however, have speculated that this was done to avoid the near-certain infighting that arises during the writing of a platform. See Bernie's delegates losing their minds after the DNC didn't include Medicare for all in theirs. Was there some internal division or more cynical reasons involved in the RNC's decision? Maybe. Really, we don't know. Either way, this decision drew disapproving glares from pretty much everyone. News outlets from The Atlantic to the National Review published pieces bashing the party for their decision here. To be fair to the RNC though, much of the 2016 platform does remain fairly relevant. Much of it is just general Republican stances, like protecting the Second Amendment and lowering taxes, that wouldn't have really needed changing even if the platform was rewritten. Of course though, this meant that certain things, most notably the current all-consuming pandemic that will define and possibly determine the election, was left out entirely. Contrasted with the DNC's fairly extensive plan for COVID, this might not be a super great look for the GOP. And to be fair to them, they seem to notice this pretty quickly. So a few days ago, the Trump campaign released a list of priorities for his second term, meant to be more immediately relevant. However, it's not extensive. By which I mean it's literally just a 50-point bullet list. But you know what, whatever. At least we've got something. And for the sake of this video not stretching out for literally hours, we won't be talking extensively about all 50 bullet points. But instead, we'll try and hit on the most significant ones. The first category on the list is jobs. As I'm sure you'll be surprised to learn, President Trump is pro-jobs. Some of the points under this section are just the general slogan-y type goals, like create 10 million jobs in the next 10 months, without any real plan of how this will be done. But some of them are actually legitimate policies, like proposed tax credits for products made in America, as well as deregulating the energy industry. In the coronavirus category, Trump's big promises are simple: a vaccine by the end of 2020, and return to normal by 2021. How will he do this? Oh, who bloody knows. But to be fair, Biden's not much better when it comes to how to actually do things. You know, say what you want about Elizabeth Warren's ideology, but at least she had some details to poke at. Would some details really hurt either of our current two contenders? Would they? Anyway, moving on. Next category, China. Specifically, ending America's reliance on China. Basically, the goal here is to stop outsourcing jobs to China, which is something presidential candidates of both parties have been campaigning on for years. But who knows, maybe Trump's got something up his sleeve. The proposed solutions this time round come in the form of tax cuts, expensing deductions, and perhaps most notably, refusing to give federal contracts to companies that outsource to China. Moving on to healthcare, Trump's priorities include lowering prescription drug costs and insurance premiums, covering pre-existing conditions, and protecting Social Security, Medicare, and veterans coverage. This is perhaps one of the most interesting sections, as many of these either go against Trump's past actions or against some of his past promises, or in some cases both. Also, they occasionally sound amusingly similar to the Obamacare plan that he espouses to hate in its entirety. Perhaps most significantly though, Trump has previously proposed to eliminate payroll taxes if he's re-elected. The problem is, these fund Social Security, which he's also promised to keep. Were payroll taxes entirely cut without providing an alternative source of funding, estimates put the program's remaining lifespan at no more than 2 or 3 more years, which is an absolutely phenomenal way of annoying a large chunk of the electorate. Of course, it's possible that Trump will announce an alternative source of funding for Social Security, or maybe he'll just roll back his comment about cutting payroll taxes. But as his priorities currently stands, he seems to be on a collision course with himself. The next category is the shortest and the one that the Democrats have been most eager to attack: education. Trump's education platform has 2 sides to it. First, providing school choice to every child in America, which involves giving vouchers to parents to use for their child's education. Essentially, it would refund school taxes to parents, and in some cases, allow them to afford to send their child to a private school, instead of confining the student to public school districts, which, in some cases, are struggling districts. And if the Republican convention is anything to go by, the GOP seems quite invested in this idea. And his second educational policy is teaching American exceptionalism in schools, which, well, will let you draw your own conclusions there. The next category is titled Drain the Swamp, which includes priorities like introducing congressional term limits, taking on various unnamed global organizations, exposing Washington's money trail, and ending bureaucracy's bullying of US citizens. There's not really much to say here, although I'd keep an eye on the congressional term limits issue. The other 3 seem to be pretty vague ideas that Trump's already been aiming for, but the term limits is actually a specific issue, and one that's been gaining quite a lot of momentum recently. Interestingly, it would also require not just legislation, but a constitutional amendment, which would certainly be entertainingly dramatic. Then of course is the law enforcement section, which does the political campaign policy version of subtweeting, by promising to not just fully fund, but hire more police officers. We've actually made a whole video on the defund the police thing if you're interested in the topic, and there's a link in the description. In the obligatory Trump immigration section, meanwhile, there are a generally standard set of Trumpy promises. Illegal immigrants don't get healthcare, deportation for non-citizen gang members, no more sanctuary cities, and requiring immigrants to be able to financially support themselves. Also, dismantling human trafficking networks, which I think we can all get behind. Interestingly, there appears to be no mention of a certain wall. Moving on, in the Innovate for the Future section, which includes such goals as launching a space force, building the world's greatest infrastructure system, winning the 5G race, cleaning up the oceans, and establishing a permanent presence on the moon, because space? Seriously though, that would actually probably be quite good for science in a number of ways. And last, and yes, probably least, foreign policy, including such standard promises as ending endless wars, maintaining the military, attacking terrorists, etc., etc. And that's it. Trump's second-term agenda as set out by his campaign. If you want to go through the whole document, there is a link in the description. Yes, this video could have been a bit more serious, but I mean, the document is a policy statement. Even political junkies like us can't get through something like that without a bit of humour. I'd say that we'd make a similarly mocking video on Biden, but given that his policies are exceedingly more complicated and not just in bullet point form, that might not be entirely reasonable for a 10-minute video, and or the maintenance of our writer's sanity. Remember, the DNC platform is 92 pages long. You try reading that and tell me how you feel afterwards. But hey, if you want us to cover it, then we'll see. Let us know if you do by liking this video and leaving a comment down below. And of course, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon. That would also be very kind of you. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible.